November 2022, 5 men are shot at a South Side Chicago watering hole. 4 are members of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club headquartered in Chicago, but 1 was a member of Southern California's finest, the Mongols. And there's been some other incidents between those two groups. So what's going on out there? The case hasn't moved along because people at the bar, patrons, the owner, the bikers, picked up the shell casings and wiped the place down. Now, just a few days ago in February of 2023 at the Pompeii restaurant in Little Italy in Chicago, the Chicago Gang Tactical Surveillance Unit sitting outside, observing, possibly listening to a meeting between some Mongols and some guys representing some Chicago street organizations. The Latin Souls, which are mostly Puerto Ricans out of the back of the yards neighborhood, and the Almighty Ambrose from Pilsen, and they're mostly Mexican-American. So what's going on? The 1% motorcycle world is one of the more complex and interesting cultures of underground America. A lot of the guys are not criminals, meeting and being friends with different guys here in LA that are, real respected members of LA street gangs. Biker groups and street gangs are not criminal organizations. There may be criminals in them or people who commit crimes, but you can be a member in good standing of a LA street gang or a motorcycle club and have a job and not do anything criminal other than in case if something, some type of fight or something breaks out involving a gang, which could just be you defending yourself, so that it still might not be criminal. But some bikers, of course, get themselves caught up in serious RICO cases, violent crime cases, plenty of bikers scattered across federal and state institutions. So there was a meeting between the Latin Souls, the Almighty Ambrose, and the Mongols in December as well. That was at a bar in Pilsen, and the Chicago gang unit was out there as well. The Mongols are making a push into Chicago, just like the pagans are making a push from the East Coast, and they've allied. And what do they have in common? Well, the Mongols are the only one of the big 4 biker groups: pagans, Hells Angels, Outlaws, Mongols, and then also of even the other smaller ones. The only other one that's mostly Hispanic is the Vagos. Mongols in 2019, the Mongols showed up and rode around the Outlaws International headquarters on Rockland and 25th on the south side of Chicago. And of course, that's a declaration of, certainly disrespect, letting them know we're here. And they dropped their first Midwest chapter in Chicago not long after. And then there was a shooting at a bar in Berwyn or something. And then there was that big shooting on the south side of the bar with the 5 people. And so the racial component, so we're talking about Chicago, but we're talking about Southern California, and two very different sets of racial, two different sets of how people identify themselves, or 2 different regimes of it. So of course, Southern California is like, Mobile, Alabama in 1960. This is the most, it's a very racist place. People are pretty dumb in Southern California. So metropolitan LA has the highest percentage of high school dropouts. So it's probably no coincidence this is a place that has a lot of people that still believe in racial mythologies, which is what they are, believing in, you're a member of some racial group and thus you have certain characteristics. It's sort of like believing in Zeus or Santa Claus or something. So high school dropouts, so they go to jail, they divide into racial stuff because they ain't got no sense. The Outlaws and the Hells Angels don't allow Hispanics, and the Mongols are mostly Hispanic, and the Pagans just recently started actively recruiting Hispanics, but of course on the East Coast is mostly Puerto Ricans, and LA be Mexicans, South Americans, Central Americans. So interesting, the Mongols went into Chicago and they got the Latin Souls, a mostly Puerto Rican group, and the almighty Ambrose. And their appeal to them is, hey, Latinos should watch Latinos' backs. So of course they want the support and the numbers of those younger guys in those street organizations who, a lot of the bikers are, well, they're older. They're always older for the most part. A lot of them, some bikers are well off. They own businesses. They're professionals. Less so can be said for street gang members who tend to be younger, living in a neighborhood. I don't know that much about I don't know anything about Almighty Ambrose and the Latin Souls. I don't know. Are they more like a street gang, or are they more like organized crime? Some of the Chicago groups, pretty serious into different things. I mean, if you read a federal government report, well, this is prior to rap music replacing drugs as a big source of income. But up until recently, if you read a federal government report about the BDs, it would say the BDs exist to sell drugs. Is that true? Is that not true? I don't know, but it's probably somewhat true. None of the big four allow blacks, of course. And in the Mongols 2008 big RICO case, there was multiple hate crimes, assaults of random motorcycle club affiliated, just random black men brutally assaulting them in public places in Southern California. So biker world, one of the last vestiges, along with prison, where people are clinging on to these racial identities, and the Outlaws and the Hells Angels don't want to give it up. I guess the blue collar white male is a dying breed. You know, it seems like if you're a white man at this late date in the United States, you got a couple IQ points and a work ethic, you should probably be doing pretty well. It seems like, you know, white man either owns his own company or working in tech, or he's on Oxycontin ODing. As you may or may not know, a husband and wife team won the Nobel Prize for Economics, my academic field, recently, for figuring out that in recent years, white people, white men especially, have had a declining life expectancy for the first time in recorded U.S. history due to overdoses, death from obesity, drinking, and primarily overdoses, and also suicides. So I don't know how that all ties in. You know, I like to reference different social stuff, but I'm sure it all goes together. So here you have the Mongols showing up. They're making an alliance, or trying to, with some Chicago street organizations, and they have a history here in Southern California. And this is a whole tricky big topic, so I don't want to bungle it. Maybe I'll talk about the Mongols and the Serenos. Certainly the Mongols, I think they were known at one point for bringing in members of what are known as greenlit gangs that didn't want to go under the Serenos and pay the street tax. And there was some conflict between Serenos and Mongols. I think the Mexican Mafia felt all Hispanic gang members, which would include Motorcycle Club, even though a motorcycle club isn't really the same thing as a gang, should fall under their umbrella. They didn't want to. They were green-lit, and they were bringing in green-lit gang members. If I'm not mistaken, I'm sure somebody will correct me, but it's something like that. And so the Mongols are engaged in their own big telenovela sort of right now with their former president, who they ousted, little Dave Santillan, who was possibly outed as an ATF informant while he was a president. the proof is kind of, and the ATF agent who was supposedly his handler testified under oath that he wasn't an informant, but I don't know what that means. But the Mongols ousted him. They voted him out. There's a $500,000 judgment against the Mongols from the federal government that the government's trying to bankrupt them. If you don't know, that's how like the official Knights of the Ku Klux Klan back in the 80s got put out of business as a official sort of corporate entity through lawsuits associated with hate crimes. They're trying to do that to the Mongols. They got an order taking the Mongols patch. Like they couldn't use it in public, but then a higher judge ruled that was infringing free speech, which, I mean, you can walk around America with the swastika. I don't see how they could take the Mongols patch. What's the kid's name? Crip Max got a Hoover killer on his forehead. You really can't stop people from broadcasting whatever lunacy they want. So anyways, a lot of drama going on. I thought it was interesting. So 2019, the Mongols show up in Chicago. They've dropped a base in the south side. Now they're thinking of doing one on the west side. And, outlaws are probably going to turn up the heat. I'm going to do a story about Harry Taco Bowman, the Detroit outlaw, who when he was a president for a long time, and he took the outlaws to war. They were blowing up clubhouses. They were going at the Hells Angels, anyone in the outlaws that messed up, the Warlocks, a lot of people, and he was running it out of Detroit. He was working with the Detroit mob. He went up to number 2 or 3 on America's Most Wanted for quite a long time. He was hiding out with my buddy, Frank the Bomb Bomberito, he told us. Frank died, R.I.P. But the biker stuff's really interesting a lot. And so for the Mongols, we have a history of working with alleged former whatever street gang members in Southern California to bolster their power in their battle against the racist Hells Angels. And I only say racist because, they have a no Hispanics, certainly no blacks policy that they enforce, as do the outlaws. The pagans have seen the writing on the wall of the demographic shift in America. America's in the 2020 census, I think it was 19% Hispanic. It's probably 21% by now. By 2030, it would probably be 25%. I always jokingly say Mexicans are the new Italians, by which I mean, culturally, they're not, I don't like that whole people of color when they lump people together. The descendants of slaves brought here to work against their will sit alone in their own social category. Mexican Americans have strong family values, Catholic, and they're moving into a lot of the blue-collar trades that perhaps the kind of white guys that were in motorcycle clubs used to do. That's not good or bad. It's economies change, things develop over time. The only thing that stays the same is that things always change. Take a puff of my multi-drug vape here, since some of you think I'm on drugs. This contains a little bit of every drug, so it perfectly balances me out. And it has a nice tobacco cream flavor. Now, let's see here. Let me look at my notes. So, of course, Chicago gang history, the formation of the People and Folk Alliance showed. So the People and the Folks each had white gangs, Hispanic, Mexican, Puerto Rican, separate, because that's the thing in Chicago, and black, of course. So it's kind of what we're seeing now. The Mongols attempting to form a super alliance with Hispanic street gangs around the country. The pagans have done it on the East Coast, and it's working for them to some extent. They got a lot of, I would assume, more or mostly Puerto Ricans and maybe, I don't know, Dominicans, maybe, but definitely Puerto Ricans on the East Coast. Some of their strongholds, New York City, Long Island, Philly, Springfield, Massachusetts, have a lot of Puerto Ricans. So they've allied themselves. I think in Massachusetts there was even a Puerto Rican that rose to be the head of a chapter, maybe. So that's a definite big change. Little Italy, where the meeting was held, is actually the home of, some say, the longest running Chicago street organization, the C Notes. C Notes date, so the 1957 in St. Charles Reformatory, had the formation of the Vice Lords, sort of which from, I guess, someone who was someone in one of those groups, I think, told me, like, sort of all the black groups sort of spring, at least from the idea of what the Vice Lords did starting in 1957. C Notes go back before that, probably the early 50s. Italian guys. At first it wasn't that young, then it became a street organization, but they're still there. They're mostly Latino now, I guess. But the C Notes have sent several of their members up to the big leagues to join the outfit, the Chicago mob. So they have a connection with the Chicago Mafia. Of course, Mickey Cogwell probably worked with the Chicago outfit to bring in the almighty H into the black community back in the day. And he was with the Black Peace Stones, and then he was killed, some saying orders of Jeff Fort when he started his El Rookin movement, though he was not charged with that. But Mickey Cogwell is documented to have had tie-in with Italian organized crime around labor stuff, but especially with the H. Let's see here. Oh, interestingly, so that little Dave guy out of the Mongols who got ousted. So the problem with gang members, and this is going on, if you read about like the Hells Angels in Ontario, Canada, where they're like the #1 organized crime group, a lot of these young motorcycle guys don't have a motorcycle. So little Dave had to enforce that you had to have a motorcycle, you had to have a license and a job. So he says, or I guess there's an idea that some of the people in the Mongols wanted him out because he was moving it away from criminality. But of course, that would go hand in hand with the idea that he was working with an ATF agent. I don't know. That's a hot button topic. You can read about it online. There's New York Times articles and all sorts of stuff. The almighty Ambrose did as far as organized crime and money. So, of course, the bikers, many bikers have been indicted over the years many times for, like meth production and sales, especially associated with, and the Mongols have had those kind of cases too. And the federal government different times have tried to say things. They called the Hells Angels the Six Mafia family, and they control this and that, but they can never get the leadership. They can never prove that any of these were criminal organizations, only that groups of members did criminal acts. And the almighty Ambrose in the early 2000s had a big PCP case where they were buying big amounts of PCP. And Cavario was telling me, we got to record something about it. PCP games, big money, still is. It's not that big in many cities. Like Chicago has it. I guess Philly, they tell me in Compton is big. I don't, I'm in Compton much. Like right in Watts, which is right by Compton, where I know people, not really doesn't seem to be a PCP culture, but they say Compton is houses you can knock on the door and get a dime still. But the almighty Ambrose had a big PCP case. Mongols, different members of the Mongols have had trafficking cases. And of course, LA is another sherm, wet PCP city. I don't know. Does that all tie together? I don't know. But Chicago PD Gang Tactical Intelligence has been watching over these meetings between the Mongols and the almighty Ambrose and the Latin Souls. As the Mongols plant their flag, they already have one chapter. They're looking to set up a second. There's been 5 plus 2, at least 7 or so people shot we know about out there. Thankfully, none passed away that we know about. Who knows what else has been going on? The Mongols fought the Outlaws fought a serious war with the Hells Angels to keep them out of Chicago. Hells Angels finally acquiesced, and they kind of made a deal. They let them set up a chapter in Harvey, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago, just so they saved face, but they couldn't keep a permanent flag in Chicago. So we'll see what kind of luck the Mongols have. They're definitely enlisting some known and active Chicago street gangs on the Puerto Rican and Mexican side. Well, at least they're attempting to. Now, what does that mean? I mean, what's the logistics? I don't know. They said Latinos, look out for Latinos. I mean, I guess if you're just a blue-collar working man, Latino guy in Chicago, you want to ride a motorcycle, you want to be with the Mongols, you get a sense of brotherhood, and you're in a bar one night and some white outlaws come in and want to beat you up, it would be nice if some of the other tough guys of the community, the young street organization members would come to your aid. Maybe that's all it is, and that wouldn't be a crime at all. Despite what the federal government in their pictures they like to paint. Al Prophet, American Dope, Chicago, vroom vroom.